Scarlett didn't know the coffee she was brewing at 6:47 a.m. would be the last ordinary moment of her life for a very long time. She was standing behind the counter of Groundwork, the café she'd spent 4 years building from a gutted storefront in downtown Savannah, Georgia, when the black SUV pulled up outside. Not unusual. People parked illegally on Broughton Street all the time. What was unusual was the man who stepped out of it. Tall, dark coat, wrong for the September heat, the kind of stillness that made other people unconsciously move out of the way. She watched him through the front window for exactly 3 seconds before the bell above the door rang and he walked in. She'd learned to read customers fast. Coffee shop survival skill. This one wasn't a customer. Scarlett Novak? His voice was low, European accent she couldn't immediately place. Depends on who's asking. My name is Remy. He placed a card on the counter. I work for Luca Carden. He'd like to meet with you. The name hit her like cold water. Luca Carden. She knew that name the same way everyone in the southeastern financial world knew it. Quietly, carefully, the way you acknowledged a storm front moving in from the coast. Private equity, legitimate on paper, with roots that went places people didn't discuss at dinner parties. Tell Mr. Carden I don't take meetings before 8. Remy didn't move. He's aware of your daughter, Miss Novak, Savannah, 8 years old. 2nd grade at Forsyth Elementary. He paused just long enough to let that land. He suggests you make an exception. The espresso machine hissed behind her. Scarlett set down the portafilter with a hand that she refused to let shake. Give me 20 minutes to get someone to cover the counter. The address Remy gave her was a hotel on the river. Not the tourist kind, the kind that didn't have its name on the outside because the people who stayed there already knew where it was. Scarlett had driven past it 100 times and never once wondered what was inside. She wondered now. The suite on the 14th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Savannah River, morning light cutting across dark hardwood floors. A man stood at the window with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, watching a container ship move slowly downstream. He was younger than she'd expected. Late 30s, maybe 40. Dark hair with the first threads of gray at his temples. The kind of man who looked like he'd been built for boardrooms and bad decisions in equal measure. Luca Carden turned when she entered, and Scarlett got her first real look at him. Sharp jaw, eyes that were a particular shade of gray that made her think of winter mornings and closed doors. Not cruel, just absolute. The eyes of someone who had never once in his life been told no and actually accepted it. Miss Novak, he gestured toward the sitting area. Thank you for coming. You mentioned my daughter. That's not an invitation, that's a summons. She didn't sit. Say what you need to say. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, more like recalibration. Your brother, he said, owes me $4.2 million. The floor didn't move, but it felt like it did. Her brother, Danny, of course. Danny, who'd been calling her with increasingly vague excuses for 6 months. Danny, who'd borrowed against her cafe's operating account 18 months ago for a bridge loan Scar. I swear it's solid. And paid it back 3 weeks later, so she'd stopped asking questions. Danny, who she'd been covering for since they were kids. That's not my debt, she said. No. Luca sat, crossing one leg over the other with the unhurried ease of someone who had never needed to rush anything. It's not. But your brother used your cafe as collateral on a secondary loan he took through one of my holding companies. Groundwork Coffee LLC is currently the primary asset securing $4.2 million in outstanding debt. She felt the blood leave her face. He couldn't have. I never signed. He had power of attorney. You gave it to him 3 years ago when you had your appendix out and needed someone to handle business affairs. She had. She remembered signing that paper in a hospital gown, half medicated, trusting her brother completely because that was what she did. That was what she'd always done. So what do you want? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. You're going to take my cafe? Luca looked at her for a long moment. I have a proposal. I'm not going to like it. Probably not. But I'd ask you to hear it before you respond. She sat. Not because she wanted to. Because her legs needed a minute. I have a problem, Luca said. I'm being considered for a federal contract that requires, among other things, a demonstrated record of personal stability. I'm being evaluated not just as a businessman, but as an individual. The committee has concerns about He paused, selecting the word carefully. Lifestyle. Your lifestyle. I'm unmarried. I keep irregular hours. I have associates the committee finds colorful. His jaw tightened slightly on the last word, like even the understatement required effort. A wife would resolve certain optics. Scarlett stared at him. You're asking me to marry you. I'm offering you a contract. 12 months. We maintain the appearance of a committed relationship for the duration of the federal evaluation. In exchange, your brother's debt is forgiven, the lien on your café is released, and you receive a monthly stipend that I think you'll find generous. And Savannah? The question hung in the air. Luca's expression didn't change, but something moved behind it. Your daughter would remain in her school, in her routines. The arrangement would require you to attend certain events with me, business dinners, a charity gala in December, a weekend in New York in January. He paused. Nothing that would disrupt her life significantly. Nothing that would disrupt her life, Scarlett repeated. You mentioned her to get me in this room. Don't pretend this isn't a threat. It wasn't a threat. His voice was quiet, even. It was information. I needed you to understand the scope of what your brother created before you heard the proposal. That's a very polished way of saying you used my child to coerce me. Luca stood and walked back to the window. You can leave. Walk out right now. I won't stop you. Your lawyer will receive the default notice on the café by end of business Friday. He looked at the river. Or you can hear the full terms of the contract, negotiate whatever conditions make this workable for you, and walk out of this hotel with your business intact. Scarlett thought about groundwork, about the 4 years of 5 a.m. mornings, the 2 failed health inspections she'd scraped through, the staff she'd kept on payroll through the slow season because they had kids of their own. She thought about Savannah, who drew pictures of the café on her homework folders and told her friends her mom made the best hot chocolate in the whole world. She thought about Danny. Then she looked at Luca Cardin's reflection in the window glass and said, I want the terms in writing, every single condition, and I want the right to add my own. He turned. That's reasonable, and you don't get to decide what's reasonable. I do. That thing moved in his expression again. This time she was pretty sure it was respect. The contract took a week to negotiate. Scarlett brought her own attorney, a woman named Patricia, who'd handled her business incorporation and who read every clause with the focused intensity of someone diffusing something explosive. They added 14 conditions. Luca's lawyers pushed back on 3 and accepted the rest. Scarlett's conditions included her own bedroom, full access to exit the arrangement at any time with 30 days' notice, no physical contact beyond what was required for public appearances, and only with her prior consent, and a non-disclosure agreement that ran both directions. She also added one that made Luca's lead attorney actually pause mid-sentence. She wants quarterly welfare check-ins with an independent third party to confirm the terms are being honored, the attorney said, looking at Luca. Luca looked at Scarlett across the conference table. You don't trust me. I just met you. The check-ins are acceptable, he said. Patricia leaned over and murmured, I like him slightly less than I expected to. Which, from Patricia, was practically a glowing endorsement. They signed on a Thursday. Scarlett drove home, sat in her car in the driveway for 11 minutes, then went inside and made Savannah macaroni and cheese for dinner because it was a Thursday night, and that's what they did on Thursdays. Normal. Keep it normal. Mom, Savannah said, stirring her pasta with the focused attention of someone conducting important research. Are you okay? You have your thinking face. I always have my thinking face. No, you have your other thinking face. The one when something's happening that you're not sure about. 8 years old. Terrifyingly perceptive. I'm going to be spending some time with someone new, Scarlett said carefully. A man I'm working with. You might meet him eventually. Savannah considered this with the gravity it apparently deserved. Is he nice? Scarlett thought about Luca Cardin at the window, the way he'd said that's reasonable, like he actually meant it. I don't know yet. Okay. Savannah returned to her pasta. Let me know when you find out. The first event was a dinner in Atlanta. 12 people, a penthouse private dining room, Luca's business associates, and their spouses. Scarlett wore a dress she'd bought herself, dark green, not flashy, nothing that said I was dressed for this role, and she'd done her own hair and makeup because she needed to feel like herself walking into a room full of strangers. Luca met her in the lobby. He looked at her once, top to bottom, the way she'd come to recognize as purely assessing no performance in it. "You'll do fine," he said. "I wasn't worried about doing fine. I talk to people for a living." "I know." He offered his arm. "I looked into your café. The reviews mention your ability to make strangers feel like regulars." It shouldn't have felt like a compliment. It did anyway. The dinner was easier than she expected, and harder in ways she hadn't anticipated. Easy because Scarlett had been navigating other people's comfort her entire adult life. And rich people at dinner parties weren't that different from anyone else once you got past the surface. Harder because Luca was different in a room full of people than he'd been across a conference table. He didn't perform. That was the thing that caught her off guard. He didn't turn on charm or soften his edges for the crowd. He was exactly the same as he'd been in that hotel suite, contained, direct, quietly authoritative, and people responded to it. The room reorganized itself around him, the same way she imagined rooms always had. Once, when a man across the table made a comment that was pointed at Scarlett in a way that required her to smile through it, Luca said 3 quiet words that redirected the entire conversation without making a scene. She caught it. He didn't look at her after. On the drive back, she asked him about it. "The comment about your background," he said, eyes on the road. "It was a test. They do that with new people. And you deflected it. You were handling it. I just shortened the timeline. You didn't have to." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "But you were right. That was my room. That made it my responsibility." She looked out the window at the Georgia dark rushing past. Something she couldn't name shifted slightly, like a door moving in a breeze that wasn't quite enough to open it. 2 months into the arrangement, Scarlett made a mistake. Not a catastrophic one, a human one. She'd had a bad week, a staff conflict at the café, a parent-teacher conference where she'd learned Savannah was struggling with reading comprehension and had cried in her car for 20 minutes afterward, and a call from Danny that she hadn't answered because she still didn't know what to say to him. And then she'd had to drive to Charleston for a weekend function at Luca's waterfront property, leave Savannah with her best friend Keisha, and pretend to be a person whose life was cohesive. She'd made it through the Friday night reception. She'd made it through the Saturday morning brunch. Saturday afternoon, she'd walked out to the dock alone and let herself fall apart a little, just quietly, just for a minute, just enough to get through the rest of the weekend. She didn't hear Luca come out. She only knew he was there because his shadow fell beside hers on the dock. "Savannah?" he said. Not a question. Scarlett wiped her face. "The reading thing. It's fixable. I know it's fixable. She's 8. Kids figure it out. She stopped, breathed. "Sorry. You don't need this," I asked, "because you were being polite. I don't do things to be polite." He sat on the dock railing, looking out at the water, not at her, giving her room. My niece had a reading issue. Dyslexia, as it turned out. She's 17 now, reads a book a week. Scarlett looked at him sideways. "You have a niece and a nephew, my sister's kids." A pause. "I'm not entirely without human qualities." She almost laughed. "Almost. I never thought you were. You thought I was dangerous. I still think you're dangerous." "That's different," he said. And she realized he meant it as agreement, not denial. They sat on the dock in the cooling afternoon for another 20 minutes, not talking about the arrangement or the contract or the federal evaluation. He told her about his niece's school, and she told him about the time Savannah had tried to make her breakfast in bed and used salt instead of sugar in the pancakes. Normal things, incremental things. The door that had been moving in a breeze opened a little further. The problem came from a direction Scarlett hadn't anticipated. She'd known about Luca's past in the way you know about weather systems. General awareness, not specific detail. She'd known there were parts of his business history that didn't survive close examination. She'd accepted that the way you accepted a lot of things when the alternative was losing everything you'd built. What she hadn't known was Marcus Hale. She found out about him at the December Gala, a charity event at a restored antebellum mansion outside Savannah, all candlelight and old money, the kind of event that Scarlett normally would never have attended and found herself navigating with disturbing fluency after 2 months of practice. She'd stepped away from the main room to call and check on Savannah, and she'd ended up in a corridor off the library where she wasn't meant to be, where Luca and Marcus Hale and a man whose name she didn't catch were having a conversation that stopped completely when she appeared in the doorway. Marcus Hale was in his 50s, silver-haired, with the particular ease of a man who'd never once questioned whether he belonged in a room. He looked at Scarlett, the way you look at an obstacle you're deciding how to move. "Your wife has excellent timing," he said to Luca. Luca's expression didn't change. "Scarlett, I'll be 5 minutes." She backed out of the doorway, went back to the main room, stood at the bar with a glass of sparkling water and a smile she'd learned to maintain while her mind was doing something completely different. Later, in the car, she asked, "Marcus Hale runs 3 shell companies that Luca uses for." She stopped herself. "Sorry, I looked him up. His name came up in a 2019 federal investigation that was dropped, and you've been moving away from certain business areas this year." Patricia noticed it in the quarterly financials during the review. Luca was quiet. "Is the federal contract a way out?" She asked it carefully. "Legitimization?" The silence stretched long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Yes," he said finally. "And Marcus Hale doesn't want you to get it. Marcus Hale benefits from the current arrangement. A federal contract changes my leverage." She looked at him. "So this isn't just about optics. You're actually trying to get out." Luca's jaw tightened. "I started this at 24 with my uncle's money and my uncle's methods because I didn't know another way. I'm 41. I know other ways now." Scarlett sat with that for a long moment. The man who'd appeared in her café 6 months ago had been a shape, a reputation, a name she'd associated with danger. This was something more complicated. A person making a decision that cost him something. She recognized that. She'd been making those decisions her whole adult life. "What does Hale have on you?" she asked. "Nothing real. He has a narrative he can construct if I don't cooperate. The kind that derails federal evaluations, and if the evaluation is derailed, then the contract goes away. I stay where I am. And he keeps his leverage. What does he get from your cooperation?" "He wants me to use my position in the contract to route certain federal approvals through channels he controls." She understood then. All of it. "He wants to corrupt a federal contract using your legitimization as the vehicle." "Yes. And you said no." "I said no." She looked out the window. Savannah, the café, the document she'd signed, the dock in Charleston and the story about his niece, and the 3 quiet words at the dinner table. The door that had been opening by increments since September. "Okay," she said. Luca looked at her. "Okay? What do you need?" He was silent for a moment, like the question was something he hadn't prepared for. "I need the arrangement to hold," he said, "through the evaluation. If there's any crack Hale can use to construct a narrative about instability, he will. The arrangement holds." She turned to face him. "But I want something in return. Name it. When this is over, when the evaluation is done and the contract either comes through or doesn't, I want you to call Danny. Not to collect, not to threaten. I want you to sit across from my brother and tell him directly that he's been forgiven and what he put me through to get there." She held his gaze. "He needs to know what his choices cost someone else. Not a lawyer's letter. You, in person." Luca looked at her for a long moment. "That's a harder ask than money, I know." "Done," he said. The evaluation concluded in February. The contract came through on a Tuesday morning, and Luca called Scarlett at 7 a.m. while she was unlocking the café. "It cleared," he said. She stood in the doorway of groundwork with her keys in her hand and the Savannah morning coming gray and soft off the river. "Congratulations. I have Danny's number. I'm calling him this week." "Thank you." A pause. "Scarlett." His voice was different, not the careful neutral she'd learned to read. Something with edges showing. The 12 months ends next month. She knew. She'd been knowing. She'd been not looking at it directly, the way you don't look directly at a bright light. "I know," she said. "I'd like to renegotiate." The morning light caught the river and made it silver. From inside the cafe, she could hear her morning prep staff starting the machines, the familiar percussion of her ordinary life. "What terms?" she asked. "No contract this time." Another pause. "Just dinner. The kind where you can say no and there are no consequences. Where we talk about Savannah's reading comprehension, which I looked into. There's a specialist in Atlanta who has an excellent success rate with kids her age, and about whatever made you want to open a cafe in a city that already had 47 of them when you started." She was quiet. "And I want to tell you something," he said. "While the terms are clear, while there's no contract between us and you have nothing to gain by hearing it, tell me. You are the first person in 15 years who has spoken to me without calculating what I could give them, even when there was something I could give you. And I don't know what to do with that, except say that I would very much like to keep knowing you." Scarlett stood in the doorway of the cafe she'd built from nothing, looking at a river she'd known her whole life, and felt something she'd packed away after Savannah's father left, after she'd decided that loving someone who had power over any part of her life was a risk she wasn't willing to take again. She felt it anyway. "There's a place on Jones Street," she said. "Quiet. Good food. Not a place people go to be seen." She paused. "Saturday, 7 o'clock. I'll be there. And Luca," she turned her key in the lock, "the Atlanta specialist. Text me her name." 6 months after that first dinner on Jones Street, Scarlett was standing in the back garden of Luca's Savannah property, a townhouse he'd bought 3 months after the contract ended. The way someone plants a flag, watching Savannah attempt to teach their newly acquired rescue dog a trick that the dog had no interest in learning. "He's not doing it," Savannah reported. "He's a dog," Scarlett said. "He'll do it when he wants to. That's what Luca said. Luca is correct about some things." Savannah considered this with the same gravity she brought to most major assessments. "I like him," she said. "He doesn't talk to me like I'm little. He doesn't talk to anyone like they're little. Is that why you like him?" Scarlett looked at her daughter, at this small, precise person who saw everything and forgot nothing, and thought about how to answer that honestly. "Partly," she said. "I like him because he's working very hard to be better than he was, and I know what that costs." She paused. "The same way people have liked me, I think, when I was doing the same thing." Savannah nodded like this made complete sense, then returned to the dog. Luca came out from the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Scarlett without fanfare, and stood beside her watching the increasingly unsuccessful training session. "She's going to outlast him," he said. "She outlasts everyone. She gets that from her mother." Scarlett looked at him sideways. He was watching Savannah with an expression she'd first seen on the dock in Charleston, unguarded in a way that his face almost never was in public. Like being around a child who decided to trust him had unlocked something he'd stopped expecting to be unlocked. She'd been afraid of this. She'd been afraid of letting someone with this kind of gravity enter a life she'd built so carefully around its own center of gravity. She'd been afraid that love in a situation with uneven stakes was just another word for vulnerability. She'd been wrong in the specific way you're wrong when you've been surviving so long that you start to mistake it for living. "I have something to tell you," she said. Luca looked at her. "Tell me." "Danny called last week, after you met with him." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "He cried on the phone. First time I've heard him do that since our mom's funeral." She paused. "Whatever you said to him, I don't need to know what it was. I just wanted to say thank you for doing it the way I asked. He needed to say it out loud as much as you needed to hear it. I know." She looked at the garden. "I'm not afraid of you anymore. I thought you should know that. I know. You're irritatingly perceptive. So I've been told." He turned toward her slightly. "Are you afraid of this?" She knew what he meant. Not him, not the past. This, what they were standing in the middle of, on a Saturday morning in Savannah, with a dog refusing to sit and a child who noticed everything. "Yes," she said honestly, "but I'm choosing it anyway. That's different from not being afraid." Luca's hand covered hers on the coffee cup. Not dramatically, just present, just there. "It is different," he said. Savannah finally got the dog to sit, threw her arms in the air like she'd won a championship, and the dog immediately stood back up. Luca laughed, a real one, surprised out of him, and Scarlett felt it the way she felt the first warm morning after a long winter. Like something that had been clenched for a long time finally, slowly, let go. Her life hadn't gone where she'd pointed it. Her brother had betrayed her trust, and a man with dangerous edges had appeared in the wreckage, and the version of herself she was now had been built from materials she never would have chosen. But it had been built. It was standing. It was hers. And that, she thought, watching her daughter chase a dog across a garden on a Saturday morning in a city she'd never planned to stay in and couldn't now imagine leaving, was more than enough. It was everything.